Welcome to Third Eye Weekly. Joining us today is Lara Aknin, a professor of psychology at Simon Fraser University, whose research focuses on generosity, money, and happiness. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the biggest findings that you discovered is that people feel better when they spend money on others rather than themselves. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. So we did some research as part of my graduate work, looking at how people can spend their money in ways that will make them happy. And we found, simply put, as you stated, that people are happier when they spend their money on others than on themselves. For instance, one of the key studies that I used to kind of come to this conclusion was we recruited students on campus in the morning hours, gave them either $5 or $20 to spend that day, asked them to spend it on either themselves or someone else. They were randomly assigned to one of these two conditions. And then we called them at the end of the day to see how they were feeling. And what we found was that people who were randomly assigned to spend on others were significantly happier at the end of the day. So this is something we found several years ago now. The paper was published in 2008, so quite 7 years ago now. But since we've replicated it with multiple samples around the world, so not just here in North America, where the study was initially conducted, but now we've run similar investigations replicating this finding in India, in South Africa, and even in Vanuatu.
Nice. And how did your studies really focus on the emotional link between money spending and happiness?
Well, we asked people how they were feeling. So there's a lot of research showing that, you can ask people how they're feeling, and it's definitely one of the cheapest ways to get insight into how people are feeling. You can also use fMRI. You can ask, you can look at facial reactions and things like that. But we focused on the self-reported happiness. However, with younger samples, specifically with kids under the age of 2, it can be difficult to ask them to self-report their feelings, not because they can't explain it, but because they're pretty much happy all the time. And so try to get at these finite differences or these discrete and small differences in happiness. What we did was, rather than focus on self-report, we captured these children's facial expressions on film and then later coded them for happiness. So there are various means through which we've assessed this link, but most of the time it's self-report, except with young kids.
So what was a situation that maybe ignited your interest in starting this research back in 2008?
Sure. So I've always been really interested in emotions, and I think they're kind of what color our human existence. Otherwise, we're just doing things with very little meaning for ourselves. And so at the time, the research on happiness was really starting to grow. It was really this blossoming field, and I thought that was a really intriguing emotion that had really been understudied. So far, a lot of research had really focused on the dark side, the negative side of human experience, and trying to relieve that instead of looking at what leads people to feel good, what leads them to flourish and really excel in their lives. And so that's what led to my focus on well-being. And this link between money and happiness was kind of just something that occurred because I was working with Elizabeth Dunn, my graduate advisor. She had just become a new faculty member, and relative to a graduate student, was now coming into a little bit more money than she had before, and was curious about how she could spend her money in ways that would make her happy. And I was really interested in the question of generosity too, and so we put those interests together. And this was just something that came out of it and has since become kind of my main line of research.
Wow.
Nice. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about the positive feedback loop that occurs between generosity and happiness.
Yeah, so it sounds like this really intriguing and unique idea, but I think it's actually something we're quite familiar with. When you think about things that make us happy, we tend to do them more often. If eating chocolate cake feels good, we want to do it again. And same thing, it appears to be the case with generosity too. And so we have this one paper that was published called Happiness Runs in a Circular Motion, suggesting that when we feel good about doing nice things for others, we're more likely to engage in helping others again. And so kind of like the chocolate cake example, when giving feels good and when we're in a good mood, we want to help others in the future.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So
And
how-
that kind of stands on, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It just kind of stands on this long link of there had been previous research actually before we came along and started looking at how giving leads people to feel. There had been a separate body of research conducted by Alice Eisen decades ago showing that being in a good mood made people generous. And so this kind of closed that circular pattern, if you will. So not only does giving make people happy, being happy leads people to give. And so it turns out it's this full circle.
Hmm. So how does the research finding that people are genuinely interested in giving generosity, being generous and giving, how does that kind of work in contradiction with a lot of research that says that we're innately selfish when it comes to money?
Yeah, so two important things. One, I don't think um, what's interesting is one study we published in our original paper, and I still think holds true today, is that people in retrospect can appreciate this finding. People say, like when you ask them to reflect upon a time, they report these differences, that they're happier after spending on others than on themselves. But when you ask them to predict what will make them happier, the majority of people, at least that we've sampled, think that they'll be happier spending on themselves. And so this isn't something that people can forecast and see coming, which is kind of unfortunate, but that might help explain, or at least in part, this contradiction about why it is that we continually, sorry, it's early here, spend money on ourselves, but we experience greater happiness when we do spend on others. However, your point about money, I think, is a really interesting one. There's a separate body of research by Kathleen Voss and colleagues that has shown that money seems to be a particular case where we become self-focused. It seems that money has this sets up this exchange framework, and just simply priming people with the concept of money, even really outside of their awareness, leads them to want to be more self-sufficient. And what that means is it leads them to offer less help to others, but also seek less help for themselves. And so I think when it comes to money, this might be one particular circumstance where it pushes us to be selfish, even though we'd be better served otherwise if we use this money on others.
So what do you think are some ways we can use this knowledge in our daily lives to increase our happiness and the happiness of others?
Well, I've never, so I think there are many ways. I think we can, choose to spend our disposable income on others more frequently. I think we often feel good when we do, and we can appreciate it, like I said, in retrospect, maybe not in advance. And so one thing we can do is, try to set goals for ourselves, or just kind of set up opportunities for us to spend time and spend money on other people, but not necessarily in ways that will break the bank. It can be as little as, you find an extra $5 in your pocket and you decide to take your friend for coffee instead of just, buying a latte on your way to work instead of not thinking about others. So just making simple spending choices and giving ourselves the opportunity to spend on others when we can. I mean, I've never suggested to people to stop paying your mortgage or rent and just go blow it on others. But when you have extra disposable income, think about spending it on others instead of just yourself. And when you can, give yourself the opportunity to spend time with those people too, rather than just simply, sending a gift that doesn't involve you spending time with that person. Try to make time for that individual too.
Have you thought about how maybe politicians and policymakers could utilize this knowledge?
Yeah, I think there are some ways we can kind of encourage it. There's a whole bunch of correlational research showing that it might just be a unique occurrence. Some more research needs to be done, but I wonder whether it's just a simple circumstantial finding that it's places where taxation tend to be the highest tend to be the happiest places. So for instance, Denmark and Sweden and those Norwegian countries where taxation rates are exceptionally high compared to what we might be more familiar with here in North America and the United States. Even Canada's high, but it's not as high as Denmark and Sweden. Those are the countries that are consistently topping happiness reports. Now that it could very likely be a simple correlation, but it could also be this kind of politically prescribed investment of others and living in a country where you're investing in your neighbors and they're investing in you. So I think more research needs to be conducted to really understand that question, but that's kind of an intriguing finding so far. So it's very possible that we could, structure our societies in ways that allow us to invest more in our communities and hopefully feel better as a result.
Well, that's all the questions we have for you today, Laura. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, have a
Take
great day.
care.
Enjoy the sunshine.
You too. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.